Hello, I'm Dr. Pierre Samaan, and it's wonderful being back with you. Thank you for joining us once again. We've been talking about suicide. We've had 4 parts. Today's number 5, and this will be the final part on suicide. It's a serious subject. It's hard to even prepare for. It brings back reminders of people that I've known in the past who have completed suicides. And certainly it's uncomfortable to think about. There are those that I knew even in high school that had completed suicides. And many times the Highway Patrol tells us that many accidents are suicide related, however they can't prove it. And so oftentimes these things come up on the news or among friends or people you hear from, and it's disturbing. It brings back those reminders, as I've already said. So what we're talking about today in this final part is how easy someone can be lured into episodes of self-harm. And we're going to, at the end of this, I'm going to read an article of someone's story who completed a suicide and how that came about. So I encourage you, especially if you're a parent, please stay tuned for that article. And you'll see it on the screen, but also there'll be a link that you can go to read it word for word on the internet. Please keep in mind that this episode, as the previous episodes on suicide, contain graphic material, and it can be disturbing or upsetting for some. So please don't watch it if you think it's going to be disturbing for you. But if you think it's going to be helpful in some way, please watch and take these things that you're learning and apply them in a way that will help others, if not yourself. And also give me a call. The internet listing, the website is listed below. Text me, email me. I'm happy to speak with you if you have questions regarding this, if there's a strong concern regarding this. There's also the 800 number listed below for suicide prevention, the suicide hotline that you can contact as well. We've been talking about the interpersonal theory of suicide, and this is sort of a little new direction that they have been going in trying to understand suicide. And according to the interpersonal theory of suicide, as we've discussed before, but just a quick review, the most dangerous form of suicidal desire and behavior is caused by the coexisting presence of 3 interpersonal elements. And those 3 elements are thwarted belongingness, we reviewed that. Perceived burdensomeness, we have reviewed that. And today we're going to quickly talk about acquired capability, because acquired capability has a lot to do with the story that we'll be talking about at the end. Also present in those 3 elements is hopelessness. Hopelessness needs to be there. If it's there and those 3 elements are there, there's a very high incidence of suicide attempts, but especially suicide thoughts or ideations, as we might say. And that doesn't change. If those 3 elements are present, according to the research that's been done since this theory came out in 2005 by Dr. Joyner, it's remained consistent with what the findings have been. Each time there's a research, they correlate everything, and they end up finding that, oh yes, it's fitting. It does happen this way, and they've been able to do that consistently with this theory. the ability to overcome the inborn drive, that innate sense of I need to do this, I must do this for self-preservation or survival, basically. That innate drive for survival that we all have that. 99% of us, let's say, have that. Is acquired capability to help us to survive and engage in those survival patterns of avoiding things that might harm us, avoiding things that could be dangerous, and so on. But acquired capability is when that survival need or survival, I don't know that we have instincts as humans like animals. Some say we do, some say we don't, but let's call it an innate nature to survive. What happens is it gets quieted down. It becomes callous, numb, to where suddenly survival isn't so important anymore. And we'll be talking about a story that fits this exactly, and it could bleed over onto your daughters, your sons. But something like this often happens with the females, with the young girls, who it's so important for them to connect with one another. And as we know, females have that strong need for relationship, the importance of deep relationship, and thank God for that, because us men tend to stay on the surface somewhat, and we're goal-oriented, but the female goes deeper, and that's the nurturer, and that's the mother that bonds, and the wife that bonds, and we need that in marriage and in families. But what happens is a form of desensitization occurs when there's suicide thoughts coupled with others, making a person emotionally insensitive or callous towards a belief, which is a thought, or an object, which can be an image. That's desensitization. In time past, physically painful or fear-inducing experiences may strengthen the resolve and decrease fears of harm or pain, leading to diminished fear of lethality, that I can't kill myself. I'm not afraid of that. I'll keep trying. I'll keep doing this event of hurting myself because I'm getting something out of it, but I'm not going to die. Well, with desensitization, that callousness comes, and before you know it, something bad happens. Childhood trauma is an example of acquired capability where there's pain, there's suffering, there's hurt. Suddenly pain is not so painful anymore. Threats are not so threatening anymore. Hurt is not so hurtful anymore. A callousness is built around it. And so desensitization occurs, suffering from severe illness over time. I have a very bad back and neck. My entire neck is either herniated or bulging. I have degenerative disc disease in my back, and so I have bulging discs and whatever else that goes on back there. So I'm in a lot of pain through the day. But there was a point where it was so bad that you just got used to it. And when you get used to something, you don't pay much attention to it anymore. In a way, I guess that's a good thing, and in a way, not so good, but that's desensitization. And thank God the Lord has been helping me a great deal in getting me through all of that to where really I just take extra strength Tylenol and Aleve through the day, and that's sufficient, where I used to have to take stronger medicines and get those shots in the back and all that. So, over time, God comes in and helps no matter what our situations are. Engaging in self-harm behaviors like self-mutilation, acquired capability is, gee, I'm doing this, I feel better, or I feel pain, and the pain takes my mind away from the emotional pain, or I'm being released, I'm feeling pressure being released because I'm bleeding, or any other reasons. Over time, it causes desensitization to going deeper, to doing more harm, eventually to a point of no return. Acquired capability is what happens when there's repeated suicide attempts. So previous suicide attempts has been found to be the #1 predictor of future attempts. That's why it's so important in counseling, or for medical doctors when they're seeing their patients and so on. If suicide or self-harm is an issue, they're going to ask, have you attempted suicide in the past? And if the answer is yes, well, then, the red flags come up and they start paying more attention, and there's more concern. Even if someone has changed a great deal since their suicide attempt, sometimes it's easier to dip back into it when a lot of stress occurs. And hopefully that doesn't happen, and it doesn't happen all the time, but it is a predictor of future suicide attempts, at least. Individuals who attempt suicide will habituate or become desensitized to the fear of death. It's like a habit. If it works, you do it again, and if it continues to work, it becomes a compulsion or forceful urge to do it again, whatever it may be. And if it can turn into an addiction, then it turns into an addiction. And we could say that suicide attempts, multiple suicide attempts, can be considered for some, especially if there's a series of suicide attempts, can be considered for some an addiction, an addictive behavior, obsessive thoughts, and there may be other things driving that as well. Weakened fear will make an individual more likely to make a subsequent attempt, as we have said earlier. Andrine's story is a story I read on the internet as I was researching this series, and it stood out to me. And this was a story titled "The Woman Who Tracks Dark Instagram Accounts." I'm not downing Instagram. I'm passing along this story so we can pay more attention to what our children are watching or participating in social media. And in this particular case, they discovered some things that they didn't know about before regarding social media, suicide, and in particular, a series of groups in Instagram. And so I'm going to read this story. I'm going to kind of sweep through it. I'm not going to read it every word because it's too long, But the link is there for you to look at so you can read the entire story. And the story begins by saying, scrolling through the Instagram feed on her phone, 22-year-old Ingeborg Blindheim explains why she's been given the nickname the Lifeguard. This woman went through social media and looked for words of suicide, individuals talking about suicide. I see a lot of people, she says, who want to die, explains this young lady who very heroically has made this a life journey for herself in helping others. I'm not just going to watch someone saying they're going to kill themselves and ignore it and hope for the best, she says. Intervening to help suicidal Instagram users is not a role Ingeborg would have chosen for herself. She doesn't work for the social media site, and she isn't paid for what she does, nor is she formally qualified in that field. But she was compelled to do these things. And in doing so, she's helped quite a few young ladies, young girls, and middle-aged women as well, from finalizing a suicide. She calls the police, or she contacts, if she can discover the name, she attempts to contact family members and so on to intervene. And if she can personally intervene, she then personally intervenes in trying to give them someone else to talk to. The Norwegian knows the power of online sharing from her own personal experience. As a young teen struggling with eating disorder, she began to follow Twitter accounts where others posted openly about their anorexia and self-harm. I saw they got a lot of attention from people who understood and cared, and I wanted the same because I didn't feel that I belonged with my friends. When you get depressed, things aren't going the way you hope they would. There's difficulties, there's trauma, there's rejection or neglect or other things going on. You feel very much alone. And it's very easy to connect with anyone or any group that seems to offer that helping hand. Unfortunately, not everyone and every group are healthy. And unfortunately, there are many with good intentions that cause the suicide thoughts to intensify rather than decrease. I think the communities make people worse because they give you ideas on how you can kill yourself, how you can starve yourself, or get rid of the food you eat, and how you can hide your illnesses from people. Very true. You know, we don't think of that much. Yet you go to a group, for example, AA, and if it's a good group, they have a good group leader that's facilitating the group, it moves along in a positive way, in a way that you're leaving the group with a good message. However, if you're in a bad group, a group where the facilitator isn't doing his job or her job, a group perhaps where there is no facilitator, and it becomes storytelling, negative scenario where you walk away feeling more like drinking than when you came into the group. sex addiction groups. Oftentimes I hear those complaints from those in counseling who go to a sex addiction group. If it's not well organized, if it's not led properly, they end up walking away from it with a greater desire to participate in their sex addiction. It's not supposed to be that way, and I'm sure the group didn't intend it to be that way, but it happens like that without proper guidance. And what they're talking about in this article is that invariably they discovered through this young lady's suicide, through the investigation of her computer, her contacts, her behavior, they discovered that she connected with a particular group that was on Instagram of those who attempted suicides and were encouraging or attempting to encourage one another. And in the encouraging, it became a reinforcement. It became, wow, I feel so bad because I just thought of harming myself, and I spoke about it on the Instagram or any social media, and all these nice folks came back to encourage me, to give me hope, to tell me I'm not such a bad person. Gee, that feels good. What if I do it again? And they do it again, and they get that encouragement again. They get that support again, which is normal for us to do. We want to give that encouragement and support. But what often happens is that desensitization occurs, or habituation occurs, where they become more callous over each attempt or each thought. And before you know it, they go a little deeper, they do more, they become more lethal in what they're doing, because each time they're getting all this positive feedback that's reinforcing the behavior. You don't think that happens. I wouldn't really think that much about it had this not occurred. And reading this, yeah, I can see that happening. And so promoting those things, we have to be careful. And that means, honestly, you should be paying attention to what your children are reading about, following on the computer. You hear one group saying, oh, that's their privacy, you should leave them alone, and blah, blah, blah. Well, that's made a mess of things. And the reality is it's made a mess of things. And you can see what's going on out there to prove it. Because of the computer, because of the internet, we have to pay more attention to our children, what they're doing, who they're participating with. And you can do it in a non-threatening way. You can be friendly and still gather the information you need to know so you can feel comfortable that your kids are listening to those who are worth listening to and not listening to those who keep giving negative messages or messages that could cause them to act out in negative ways because they're hearing it over and over again. The article goes on to say when girls now post their suicidal attempts, they'll post an illustrative image from their day-to-day life, maybe an image of them lying in their bed and saying in the text, "This is my final day, I don't want to live anymore." The journalist is also concerned that the social media site continues to recommend users who post harmful content to other users, something which Instagram said in February that it would stop. We've seen girls trying to kill themselves and on the same day being recommended to other suicidal girls. So this is how the network keeps growing. And when she says growing, She's talking about all over the world. It's not just in Sweden where this incident occurred. It's in other major countries, including the U.S., and it is growing. The point I'm trying to make here is suicide is deception. It's perceived that this is the only way out. This is the only way to escape, to feel better. And I always tell clients who are thinking about it is, we don't know what's going to happen if you were to commit suicide afterwards. What's going to happen afterwards? You've taken away all your choices. If you commit suicide, what is the afterlife going to be like? Is it going to be nothing at all and just existence ends? Is it going to be heaven or hell? Is it going to be something else? One thing is for certain. By committing suicide, you've ended your choices. You no longer have choices. Whatever's going to happen is going to happen. The choice is now in the hands of destiny, or as I would see it, in the hands of God. But you're alive. And if you're alive, you have choices. You can choose to get up in the morning. You can choose to eat whatever you want. You can choose to go to school or go to work. You can choose to say no, or you can choose to say yes. You have choices that you can still make no matter how powerless or trapped you may feel in your life. You have the power of making your choices. But if you make that one final choice of suicide, it's over. There's no more choices. That's the end. Now you're leaving it up to fate as to what's going to happen. I don't know about you, but I like having choices. I like continuing to make my choices, right or wrong, each time I learn and I grow. And I know that whatever situation I'm in right now, it's going to change in an hour. It's going to change in a day. It's going to change in a week or a month. It never stays the same all the time, because life changes. And if life is terrible right now, then you've got something to look forward to, because it can only get better then. If it's the worst now, well, then you've got the best to look forward to. Make those right choices for the future, and you'll be happy you did when you look back on it all. God bless.